Hello and welcome to the Cubicle Liberation Podcast. I'm David Wood here with Joshua Fletcher. How you doing today, Fletch?
Fine and dandy.
Today I'm excited to talk about inevitable success. We've talked about it before, but for 2021 and beyond, we're going to add some clarification, go pretty deep here, I think, into what it really takes to build yourself to where you can be successful inevitably. And if you can see on the screen, if you're watching this on YouTube, and if you're not, then this will be in the show notes. There's kind of a few steps that kind of build towards success, a few foundational pieces that really will enable you to put yourself in a position to succeed inexorably or inescapably. And that is how to know what's true and using that to kind of build your understanding, and then use that to use all of them together to figure out what's important. And then from that, success is kind of a natural result. So today we're going to talk a lot about how to know what's true, but let's take a big step back and say that success is kind of defined as you want it to be. You know, it can be different for different people. If you want to go live in the forest and build yourself a cabin and make no money, but live off the land, that's what you go out and do, that's successful. Versus, you know, if you want to be the owner of a big company and make a bunch of money and you go out and do that, that's also successful. So what do you think of that foundation to get started with, Fletch?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting that we would need to develop an idea of what success is. A lot of us use that word and we don't take time to consider what it really means to us, what it is not, right? So we're going to be talking about how do we know what's true. We really need to build definitions in our own mind of what these concepts of these words point to. And, you know, vocabulary, I think, is a very mistreated topic in a lot of the academic school system, because we kind of memorize the word means these other words. You know, we don't really take the time to understand what the concept is or how it differs from other things. And that's really where you're going to start building understanding. We're going to be talking about that in this series. And that's a really kind of a way to start thinking about how poorly we represent a lot of these things in our own mind, and why we can get off track if we don't take that time to create distinctions in what things actually mean and how we represent them and how we consider them.
Yeah, and if you're not doing that, if you're not building your understanding, then how can you know what's going to take for you to be successful in the way you want to be successful? I mean, if you're identifying things incorrectly, then you're going to make bad decisions based upon that, and it's going to make it a lot harder for you to be successful. But when you line these things up, it becomes much simpler and easier to know what you want to be successful with and how you're going to go about making that happen. So, but you know, we're going to have to go really far back to start at the beginning, just for the sake of really building a super strong foundation. And I think that both of us, we think that these topics are not talked about often enough, but they're actually super, super important. So let's move into how to know what's true and what's not true. Okay, so I want to point out something here that I think everybody does, and I don't think it's always identified very clearly. You know, I think there's kind of an assumption with a lot of when people talk about what's true and what's not true, that it's kind of a 0-1 thing. And I don't really think that is true for most people when they're kind of estimating what something's true or false. Oftentimes, it's kind of a non-zero number. It's a non-simple number. You can't just say, oh, well, I definitely think that's true, or I definitely think that's false. There are situations where you could be very close to 0 or 1, and then you can act as if it's 0 or 1. And so that's definitely something that we're going to talk a little bit more about. But for me, like, for example, sitting in a chair, technically the chair could fall and break, and I'm going to act as if it's not going to fall because I've sat in a chair a gazillion times and it's never broken that I remember. So it's not something that I'm going to really consider, even though technically the chair could break. What do you think about this kind of scale of true false, Fletch?
Well, so one of the things that you said there, I think I'd maybe latch onto and run with, and let's see if it kind of helps us think about this. You said, you know, the chair, right? doesn't seem like it's going to break, hasn't ever broken as that I remember. Okay, so now we've introduced one of the ways that we can all look at this in our own life and realize that what we're using as far as our memories go, which is one of the only things we really have to work with as far as inputs from the outside world, how limited it is, how incorrectly it represents what truly happened, and what the relationship with that memory, like how skewed that can get over time, or with different influences, or with different questions that you ask about the memory. All of these things really come into play. And yet we act as if we remember things the way they were. And then because they were that way in the situation that we believe was that way because of our memory, we then act on that and say, this is how it's going to be again. And that is good for sitting in a chair and believing it's not going to break. Not necessarily good on trying to figure out what you should be working on in life to succeed, how to go about success, what you should be working on as far as achieving a life of happiness and success and goodness and love. That method is not good for deciding those things. We have something called survivor bias in statistical world, survivorship bias, where we see these people who have succeeded to a massive degree, and they look at their own memory and say, this is what I did, this is why I did it. And then they tell that to people. They create books, they do podcasts, they're on the radio, they're on TV, whatever it might be. Their own memory is just as flawed as ours is. We don't hear from the 1,000 or 10,000 other people who did exactly the same thing based on their exact same memories and did not succeed. And so our entire model of how do you succeed in life is, I say entire, almost all of it is heavily influenced by those few people who got lucky and won, so to speak, did really well, and then became a guru of some sort, right? And then tell other people, oh, this is what I did, this is why I did it. They're just going back in their own memory and saying this is that. If we could have asked the 1,000 people who didn't succeed what they did, they would say the same thing. And this really points to something we were talking about off camera before we got going today, which is at any given time, we never make a decision we think is wrong. Oh, you know what? It seems like I should do this, but no, I'm going to do something totally different. Like we make the decision. It seems like this is the right decision to make, right? And that's throughout history. This is every memory you have of your own self. Like, how could I have been that dumb? Well, you were acting on the decision that you thought was right at that given time. And so when you take that across 7 billion people, however many people we have on the planet, some of them are going to win the lottery and be worth $100 billion, right? They just are. You're going to stack, you rolled 25 sevens in a row. If you have 7 billion chances to do that, some that's going to happen sometimes.
Right thing to do.
You think? And so they say, well, I made the right decision. Well, yeah, but it was kind of lucky. And it was just based on the fact that we've had, 7 billion chances to do that with the people that we have on the planet Earth right now, give or take, whatever ballpark.
Yeah. So I think kind of, if I were to summarize sort of one of your points there, kind of where everything ties back into it, it's sort of like we have to use our brain to kind of do this stuff. And it's a filter, it's flawed. We have flawed memories and flawed perceptions. And so that kind of has to be taken into account to some degree when it comes to considering these true or false things. Is that a reasonable kind of?
Well, if so we can say it's true that I have this memory, or, my perception of this memory. I can say it is true that I recollect that.
Right.
We really can't say it's true that happened. Like all the time, I see couples, and I've been that person in a relationship. Oh, no, you said this. It's like, Like I see that happening all over the place. And I'm like,
Of course.
well, we can say, I don't remember you saying that, but saying, no, you didn't say that. Like people get in arguments about that all the time. And it's like,
Yeah.
well, unless
It's
it was video
very
recorded, but it
right.
doesn't even matter.
Exactly.
And at that point, it doesn't matter either. If you're trying to be in a relationship, you're trying to relate. It's like, well, it's just a big waste of time. So anyway, so what I would say is that we need to kind of look at anything that requires the use of our memory as something that's potentially extraordinarily inaccurate, limited, wrong, and corrupted. Everything
And I would
that uses
take that even further to our own perceptions of reality, as we're gonna dig a little deeper into like your ability to perceive what really happened just a moment ago, not just what's happening right now, can be off. It has to go through the filter of our brain, and our brain fills in a lot of gaps for us. You think that what you see is exactly everything that you see, but a lot of times your brain is just kind of, it has a fuzzy idea, but then what it sends to you, it's like kind of like going, well, we think it's this, and so we're going to kind of tell your consciousness that it's this. And so, you do have to be aware of that. And I think that should factor into your 0-1. And that's part of why there's not a lot of things that I feel like I have to really stretch and say, okay, I'm going to act as if this is true, even though it's probably not, except in the cases where sometimes there's a practical benefit. Again, we're going to talk about that. So here, if I'm going to like draw the how to know what's true, like where's the first, like the kind of the real starting point of where we can start to build upwards and start to build towards like building understanding. And if we really just go to the basics of kind of like philosophicalness, I don't know what the word would be there.
philosophical.
Philosophical. Start with, I'm going to act as if that I can perceive a representation of reality or parts of reality. So like I can see the monitor right in front of me, and I'm perceiving that as reality as it points out to me, but I'm not seeing. There's so many different ways you could look at that. You could look at it on a molecular level and it look completely different. And there's also different angles and perspectives that you can look at it. But in general, I'm perceiving at least some part of reality, and it's not just complete fiction. I'm not just living in the matrix. If I am living in the matrix, well, there's not really much I can do about that. So I'm just going to assume that I am not living in the matrix. You want to say something about that?
No. I was just with that. If you can get to a place where you can realize that whatever it is you are is aware of something, that's a place to start. And so the way you can know that is true, which means it's a place that you can build from, is that the opposite of it cannot possibly be true. It's a non-starter. Okay, let me try to even think about. This is not using my memory now. We're not in that flawed world of what we remember and what we recall. Let me try to consider what it would be like if I was not aware of something. Like the mind cannot even do that. It's like, well, if we're engaging with the mind at all, feeling, thinking, seeing, smelling, touching, tasting, any perception makes I'm aware of something true. And so that's not based on memory. That's not based on weird things that we may have faultily associated one with the other or anything like that. That is a different use of our mind that requires consciousness, because that's how we can say, okay, I'm aware of something. We can know this is true. There is something I'm aware of. You call it consciousness, call it awareness, call it perception. I don't care. But build that for yourself in a way that doesn't equivocate. You can build there, right? And that is a use of the method. Anything that starts using your memories, you've got to be really careful about what you say you know about it. You can say, I know I don't clearly see something better than this course of action. You can say that, but just make sure you don't equivocate that to there isn't a better course of action.
Right. Yeah. That's something we're trying to be I think both of us are trying to be very, very clear with the language that we use.
Yeah, and not like wordplay, like it, but we're trying to point to these distinctions that are very important.
Mm-hmm.
And in conversation and things like this, it's like, you know, the things that my wife and I talk about, you know, we don't remember half of the same stuff, and our representation of them in our mind is probably so ridiculously different. It would be shocking for us to truly be able to compare, which I don't know
Right.
the way to do that. So it's like, well, okay, then
She's right, you're wrong. That's how you compare.
well, yeah, you can go with rules, you know, heuristics. This is how things work. Yeah. And so anyway, so this kind of piece is to help you see that there is a different way of thinking that does not
Mhm.
rely on potentially very faulty inputs.
Right. So, and the kind of the start, one of the starting points of that is that we can perceive something, or as you said, we're aware of something. There's something there that we're perceiving, and therefore, and it's not just something flimsy. It's not nothing. It's not so much it's not nothing as it is. It's a representation of some part of reality. Again, I don't think we can look with our eyes and see all that there is to the reality of, let's say, this cup or something. I can't look at everything that is right here because there's so many different perspectives you can take on it. But it does show me a reflection, and I can use that as a basis for making conclusions that there's water in the cup, and therefore if I put the water in my mouth, I drink it, and then there's water in my mouth now. So
yeah.
And then from that, and this is, I feel like I had to really think about this because I think that I'm very mathy, and so kind of like logic came kind of naturally to me. So I really had to think about like, where did I pull that from? And I think it's connected actually to the first part, but I'm always going to act as if there's kind of basic universal logic to the universe. Now there are some things there's definitely things that appear chaotic, and there's reason to believe that there actually is some chaos. But I think there's also reason to believe that there is some order. Now I'm going to say something that sounds a little contradictory to what Fletch was saying, but I think we can make this conclusion based upon my memories, but not so much about like a specific memory that has to be right. Just living X amount of years on this planet. And every time I drop a ball, it falls to the ground. Right. So there's some sort of order there. Gravity, right? That's one example. It's going to happen if all the conditions, if the wind is the same and the weight of the ball is the same and everything, the height is the same, it's the same exact thing is going to happen over and over again. So that happens because there is some amount of logical order to the universe, and we can use that logic. We're kind of using it now, so this is a bit self-referential, to make more conclusions, especially as we can test the things we can perceive about reality, and we can combine it with logic. And this is going to be a very useful kind of setup for being able to test reality to some degrees, to test what's true and what's not true. So these two first things, I'm going to act as if they're true, that I can perceive parts of reality, and that there's basic universal logic to the world we live in. There is some chaos, but there's definitely some order and logic to the universe. What do you think about that second piece, Fletch?
Yeah. One of the things that chaos, I would say it represents is something that we don't yet understand.
It's perceived chaos. I mentioned
so yeah. And that's really important because a football game to somebody that doesn't understand any sort of game would look like chaos. Like, why are they running that way? Why has this person not ever touched the ball? Like, you know, they're just like, these are things we don't understand. Right. And so, you know, even getting into physics and higher level maths and things like that, which also was something I was very much drawn to and did well with through graduate school, even. Some of these, you know, chaos theory and things even of this nature are things we don't yet understand. Right. We can represent them. And this is what the nature of what you're talking about is okay, we're going to represent this because that representation is almost a placeholder to say we're very something very much like what we're representing here is happening every time that we can perceive or calculate or whatever it might be. But then we have like even like constants that are measured as opposed to derived, they change based on the precision of the instruments. Like what is, gravity? Well, on Earth, where, at what altitude, at what latitude, long, like it's just like, it's like we have a representation for gravity and we think it's about how much effectively, we weigh on Earth, but it's really a completely different concept if you really get into the math. But we just kind of use it to represent it. We're like, okay, well, I drop a ball, it falls. If it's a bouncy ball, it'll bounce back up. If it's we don't want to drop it on our toe. If it's a heavy ball, like, these are things that keep us, like, effectively a lot of our senses. And I've done a lot of thinking on this and trying to consider it. It's mostly just to keep our biological self from, falling off cliffs and getting eaten by bears and lighting ourselves on fire. And
I've done
and
all
things
of those
that nature.
things.
Like it's kind of weird.
Sounds
It's
like a
like
party.
yeah, that was last Saturday night, but then what that creates then is kind of an issue. I'll just kind of just say, consider that right now.
Yeah.
That
And
all of the thinking we do
Uh-huh.
is based on something that was never really meant to help us understand what's true about success in life. For instance, it was designed to keep us from getting eaten by a bear.
There's a lot of stuff that we're covering that we'll cover again as we go down, because a lot of this stuff is kind of works together with other things. But what Fletch just said, we'll kind of go a little bit deeper into as well.
Yeah,
it's perfectly applicable here as well. I want to make one more point about number 2 here, which is like, when I drop that ball, it's not going to suddenly turn into a bunny. That would be sort of like, kind of like if someone were to act as if, well, there's not really any logic, we can't really make any conclusions based upon anything. Then it's like, well, but there kind of is some order to things. Fletch doesn't randomly turn into an evil bunny, and then back again into Fletch and then into a hippopotamus. Like that, it's the universe is just not like, it's not that chaotic. It can't be full, complete chaos. And in the way that we have, just based upon your own experiences with life, there are some things that are reliable and that there is some order to it. And we can extract that order and use sort of like a logical order to that as well. Not so much physics order as it is just kind of like figuring out what's true and what's not true. So these are the 2 things that I'm going to always act as if, until there's some sort of evidence that proves me wrong here, which I doubt there will be. This is some sort of like the very foundation, acting as if we can perceive parts of reality and that there's basic universal logic. We also talked about, I think there's sometimes where you want to act as if for kind of a practical benefit. Fletch, you had an idea on like an RPG game and kind of imagining like you're in an RPG game.
Well, yeah, that's kind of one of the things that I have played around with as I've played role-playing games, RPGs, on computer consoles, and before we had computers, Dungeons and Dragons and Warhammer and some other things like that, right? So I'm familiar with how they work. And they were always just a ton of fun. And you could kind of become a character and develop him or her and flesh it out to, have different items that you acquire that are more powerful, that help you achieve more in the game and take on bigger enemies and solve bigger problems in the land that you're operating in and all these kinds of things. And some people who play those role-playing games, it's all about battles, right? And winning the battle. And some people, it's more about like really building out the world and saying there's trouble between 2 towns. There's this trade disagreement. You've got to be more diplomatic, or like you can treat those however your little group of people that play together wants to treat it. Now, the reason that this is kind of important is that we're like, in a certain way, like the real us, like not just our mind, but like the being that we are we're kind of plopped down in this world with some faculties to experience it, and then said, okay, what are you going to become? Right. And so the people around us, our immediate family usually, or the group of friends we have hey, you know, I heard this rumor about such and such. Let's go over and check it out. It's almost like you can kind of look at the way that your character, which is you that you're playing right now, was developed, was largely based on the world that you were plopped down in the middle of. And then maybe some personality that came with your DNA, but really that's kind of part of the world too. You know, your physical body is part of this world. And so you as the player gets to do a lot of different things to choose your own adventure, right? That's kind of, I don't want to mix too many metaphors here, but that's really kind of what you're doing. You're presented with a situation and you're going to make a decision based on who you are, who the group of people you have with you, maybe the weather, maybe, you know, what God you pray to, any number of things. And those things are kind of random. They're we don't have a really good job. We don't tend to use a really good method for saying, well, this is one that's clearly the best choice for me to do right now.
Until you're done with the series, and you'll have a better method.
then yeah, the raw materials will be there.
Yeah.
You got to build your own house one way or another, right?
Yeah.
The learner in one way is responsible for the material to learn, you know, because you're the one who has to live with it.
So you've used sort of like this RPG kind of metaphor for improving yourself throughout.
Well, what it helps you do is also to kind of understand that the real you, you're playing this game and you want to succeed in this game, or do you want to be the drunken beggar?
Right.
It's because some people act as if they want to be the drunken beggar by all of the decisions,
or that it's their only choice.
That it's their only choice.
And so there's this thing called like a growth mindset versus fixed mindset. And I like the RPG game because it implies a growth mindset. It implies that you can get better, you can become more. And I think that's very true for life. We start off so tiny and little, and we are capable of so much. So I think this is one thing this is not an act as if it's true that you're in an RPG game. This is an act, just kind of an act as if. It's kind of a little bit of a side note here. I like the free will for this, using this for free will, because it's kind of simple. We're going to use the logic and the free will. So if I don't have free will, then nothing I do really matters because I don't have free will. So I'm going to act as if I have free will, because if I do, well, then that's what I need to do. There's really no point to act as if you don't have free will. That's kind of an example of where acting as if can be helpful. I like acting as if I'm going to inevitably succeed. I think that's useful to a point. Obviously, you need to ask. You can't do that in isolation. You can't just sit in a mountain and act as if you're going to inevitably succeed. I guess that's not really doing it. Maybe unless sitting in a mountain is how you want to succeed. I also like I'm not going to get by a comet. You know, I guess it's possible. This kind of goes up to the 0 or 1, true or false, but I'm going to act as if I'm not going to buy a comet. I'm not going to go around every day being like, a comet may fall on us, a comet may fall on us. I'm not going to waste brain resources on that. So, do you have more you wanted to say about the RPG game?
No, I mean, it'll probably come back up again. It's not something that's like, oh, this will blow your mind, but it's kind of interesting to consider that in a lot of ways, if we treated our life more game-like, we'd take it more seriously. And that's kind of, sounds it's kind of paradoxical, but we kind of act like this is, even though we believe free will, I think most people do believe we have some degree of free will, we also feel largely trapped in what we can do and decide to be. You know, our personality kind of is somewhat fixed, and we can't really just say, oh, well, I'm going to start becoming a master of cold calling and selling on the phone. No, I'm not really that person, right? It's like, well, you can be. You just have to develop an understanding of what it would take to be that.
Level up your game in that area.
And so, like, one of the things that kind of goes along with a lot of the work that I've done for a different project is that, and this is how kind of we treat the family a little bit in my house, is like, you've got to pay some price to level up. And sometimes it's paying for training. Sometimes it's paying with time. All the time, it's paying with attention. And so you've got your fixed amount of attention. What are you going to spend that on? It's kind of like your resource points. Like, am I going to be really good at at watching TV. A lot of people act as if that's like the most important thing, but we can kind of look at that when we laughed, right, when it comes up. And so, you know, by, like I said, in some ways, treating your life a little bit like a game, we take it more seriously as far as what we allocate our resources to. And that's kind of the strategy behind this whole thing. So
yeah, that's useful. So here's a tool, opposite testing. Why don't you talk a little bit more about, you've already mentioned this a few times. And so what do you do with this, and how do you?
Well, yeah, the easiest example. Okay, let me try to find another one, because we talked about the one, I'm aware of something. Okay, what's the opposite of that? How can I know that's true? Well, we find the opposite. So I'm aware of something. The opposite would be I'm not aware of anything, right? Or I'm not aware of something, right? If we want to be very technical, but you get they both kind of mean the same thing, right? So we can know one is true. And like a way to use this same sort of method would be like when we're like people use the wrong method. I'm trying to contrast it, right? Because we see contrast. We need to have a contrast to be able to perceive something, really. There's
distinctions are very helpful.
Yeah, just like differences are very, very big in the way we engage with the physical world, and even the the mental world that we create. So, like when like all the time, people will look at like the financial reports, and they'll see like what happened with GameStop and the people on Reddit that were running the price up. And they're like, oh man, if I would have got in at $8, it ran to 300, I could have made this much money. And they'll spend time calculating and all this kind of thing. There are probably billions of opportunities like that every single day on the planet. Maybe every single hour. The math at some point, I'm trying to just use really big numbers, because you can't really ever do anything with, oh, I missed an opportunity.
Yeah.
Like, how many opportunities did you miss? That's a silly question to ask.
Yeah. There's no way around it. You're gonna miss unlimited amount of opportunities, basically.
So let's think about, that's a silly question to ask. How many opportunities did I miss? Okay, so let's try to look at the opposite of something like that. Maybe there's not an opposite. I just kind of grabbed it, so I haven't worked through this yet. Silly and important, maybe not exact opposites, but they're very close to kind of being opposite. It's an important question to ask, that I should figure out how many opportunities I missed. Like you can't do anything with that. There's no way to calculate it. B, it's going to take tons of time. I say A, B, C, or 1, 2, 3, whatever. I'm gonna wind up missing more opportunities while I'm calculating how many opportunities. So this like infinitely regresses to like nearly, like it approaches infinity. By the time I'm done calculating, I've missed more, and so it just keeps. Okay, so I can know it is silly to calculate how many opportunities I've missed, and yet people spend tons of time in their life regretting things and wishing they would have done something different. And they I've done it. I continue to do it. It's not like I'm now somehow different or better. Like, I'm talking about this because I know we do it.
You're taller for sure.
I'm taller. Well, than some people, right?
Most people.
Most people. Yeah. I'm
not relevant. Sorry.
Upper quartile. Yeah.
My job here is to distract
squirrel.
Yeah, that's my job.
My job is to try to stay focused and on track. So the yeah, you did it. You've done it. You've done well, sir.
So the opposite.
So then, well, okay. So I was talking about like the time that we spend wishing we would have done something else, or wishing we would have got in on GameStop at $8 or whatever it is. Like, we're literally missing opportunities by thinking about missed opportunities. Like
Amen.
As a heuristic, as a method, we can just clearly see. So that's not to beat yourself up when you find yourself doing that, but it can be just a little red flag you wave to yourself in your mind to say, yeah, this is silly. I know it's silly because I've looked at this with a better method, a proper method of understanding things, not based on my memory. I know this is true. So wave your red flag, be done with it. And then your resources can be allocated more properly to help you succeed. Right. And so that's kind of the nature of a lot of how these things can work. And none of those are really based on memories, right? They're not based on sensory input as much as they are kind of logic in that kind of realm of like logical and philosophical and psychological, but they're not exactly just that. They're things that we can just clearly say that doesn't go anywhere. Right? And we can say that's a dead end. I'm not going to go down that dead end. I can clearly see it's a dead end.
So the opposite testing goes like this. If I could say this correctly, it's kind of hard to have to be very careful. If the exact opposite of something has to be false, then the something has to be true. And is that correct, or did I say that right?
Yeah,
I think
yeah. And that comes kind of out of logic as well. There's a logic rule for that.
Yeah.
But it turns out that in practice, that one is extremely useful to, and something that we rarely do with our mind in life, commonly. It's just something that you can read a book on logic and that rule will be in there. I don't even know what it's called necessarily. I think it's non-contradiction. I could be wrong. That's a term also that I picked out of Ayn Rand stuff. So I may not be exact with what that rule is called, but regardless, it's a logic rule. But it's something that you can train your mind. I say train, that you can actively be aware of using your mind for.
Can you give me an example of something like a simple scenario where you can do an opposite test to make a useful conclusion? I'm on the spot.
I'm trying to think of something that's there's stuff in my
it's
okay. So here's something interesting that you'll need to be able to kind of do. Okay, I should clean my office. This is so let's kind of go into the world of that many of us live in a lot of times. I should clean my office. Like, how would you know that that's true? What's the opposite of I should clean my office? I shouldn't clean my office. Well, that would kind of point to maybe there's something more important to do. Is there something more important? Like, you begin kind of working on like the one of the reasons that you kind of have to have the whole map to understand the land is that you have to get into these topics like importance, like, oh, I should clean the office right now. Well, if there's something more important to do, if your house is on fire, right? And you're in the backyard in your office and you're like, oh, I should clean the office. And you can see smoke out there. Like that kind of obviously is not true. Right. But there can be all sorts of those little fires burning in your life and you don't know about. But we kind of acting as if in certain wrong situations. I'm kind of mangling this. Like you put me on the spot, damn it. But like a lot of times we just kind of go about doing stuff that's in our field of vision. And that's what I was talking about. Like, I'm right here, so it feels like I should do this.
Okay.
And so what I'm trying to do is to help people see that there is a difference in different ways we can use our mind. Like, we walk into our office, it's messy. Now, somehow that jumped to the top of your priority list as far as what you need to do right now. That is not a good way to necessarily decide what you should do right now or what would be more important to do right now.
Basically, after this kind of 1 and 2 here, everything after this is just kind of like an organized list of tools and strategies for telling what's true. And so it's all going to kind of bleed together. I don't personally use the opposite testing that much, at least not intentionally. I think it does require like identifying like what are false dichotomies, things that appear to be opposites that are not really opposites. But there's definitely could be some logical conclusions that you can make based upon the opposite stuff. Maybe Fletch, if one comes to you, an example, then let us know. Because that'd be, I know that there are examples to where it's helpful.
Well, yeah. So one of the issues is, that maybe I'm having right now, but one of the interesting things that happens is when you notice one of these, then what you can also properly build out and understand become nearly infinite. So maybe there aren't a whole lot of things that you can absolutely know, but what can be built on those things that you absolutely know are massive, right? And so it's kind of like it is a proper foundation. So it's a method. So it's not even a thing.
You could call it a tool. A method would be like a
So
tool.
with a, I don't know, hammer kind of thing, there's a lot you can do with a hammer, right? So it's kind of like a hammer.
Yeah, I agree, but it doesn't work in all circumstances. Here's another tool that I like to use, like extremes. I'm reminded of this kind of competition when I was in high school. It was like a physics competition to try to get into this fancy pants summer program. My friend was working on it and I didn't apply to it, but he told me the problem and I felt like it was pretty easily solved by looking at the extremes. The problem was if you had, I can't remember it was like, I think it was basketballs and golf balls. If you had a bunch of them, and you put in about an even number of them into a big giant bin, what would happen? Like what, like would basically the question was around like, well, would all the golf balls go to the bottom? Would the basketballs go to the top, or would they mix in evenly, or would the basketballs be on the bottom? And I can't remember, they phrased the problem more kind of boring, like to where it was like circles, spheres of close sizes. And I think with this, you can take really extreme examples. You could use like basketballs and sand. It's clear that if you poured sand on top of a bunch of basketballs, the sand would go to the bottom. And this was a quick way for me to kind of test that, oh, okay, yeah, clearly like the bigger ones are going to basically go to the top and the smaller ones are going to go to, more like the smaller ones are going to go to the bottom, depending on the differences. So like there's a lot of situations where you can try to, you're not at one of the extremes, but you can use the extremes of the situation to kind of figure out what's really true and what's not true.
Yeah.
Do you ever do that, Fletch?
I do. There's a lot of circumstances. Like kind of going back to math. I recall it being like limits, like when you were running the limit of, f to it, f equals infinity or something like that. I can't remember exactly how the math formula works, but I remember the method. Like in practice, like something like reparations in the popular news cycle. People talk about reparations, and so you can begin, which reparations means that some injustice was done to your predecessor, your ancestor, by somebody, and you need to be made whole for that, right? There needs to be reparations paid, or things exchanged, and so it's really an argument that you can clearly see is somewhat ridiculous to consider trying to do that in some manner that is reasonable when you take it to limits. It's like, okay, well, at some point in time, every one of our ancestors perpetrated something bad on someone else and were also perpetrated on most in every sense, right?
Right.
So that's something that we can see, okay, if we're going to try to do this, how are we going to get all the way there? You can't. Okay, so if we can't get all the way there, it's going to be arbitrary where we stop. And if it's arbitrary where we stop, that's going to be based on now
a recipe for disaster.
We get into it's like, okay, that's not really a helpful conversation to spend a lot of resources on, because that's in practice one of the things that I do, that sort of thing with. It's almost kind of like the what we were talking about with when we can get into arguments about, no, you said this. It's like those arguments almost turn into these things when you take it to a limit, like, what do you remember? And we're going to argue about the fact that we remembered something different. You take that to its limit and it becomes ridiculous, because the two people that are talking are not going to have, agree on very much. And the more they can remember, the more they'll remember differently, probably. Right.
Well, it also, when you remember a memory and you kind of pull it out, and when you put it back, your brain is rewriting it. So every time you remember something, it's potentially changing it at least a little bit. And
reinforcing it.
Very careful.
And if, when you take it out, if you play with it too much, If it's back in,
Mhm.
it's different, you know, and it changes and becomes more impactful or less impactful. There's a whole bunch
Yeah.
of things you can do with that. Anyway, that's maybe not as clear as example as the kind of reparations thing. The limits thing too. It's like, well, I need to worry about lost opportunities, right? That's kind of a thing that we can see. It's like, oh, how many are there? Well, it goes to infinity. Okay, so
Yeah.
I'm not going to worry about it. I'm going to figure out a different way to decide on what I'm going to do.
There can be specific um, opportunities that you did miss or that you were very close to that you kind of grasped for, or that you know just slipped past you that you can maybe like, man, I could have done better there. But to worry about
Well,
every single opportunity is just, it's just not practical. You're just gonna, that's all you worry yourself to death.
yeah. So a lot of
It'd be
times
wasteful.
people kind of stop at like, oh, I missed that. I should have, right? I wish I would have.
Maybe you shouldn't have.
As opposed to trying to understand what happened that would either put you in a better position for the next time that you are in the right place at the right time, or so that you can avoid being in the wrong place at the right time, or the wrong place at the wrong time, or whatever it might be, right? It's like overall what we're trying to do is seek understanding, right?
Yeah.
I've got that as a domain name, right? This is about trying to seek understanding about who we are, how we operate, what we're doing here, how do we live better, how do we help more people live better as well, that sort of thing. We're trying to seek understanding about that, and so these are the tools that we can use to develop that.
Yeah. And part of that is how to know what's true. And that's going to help you be kind of a found. It's along the same lines as seeking understanding.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing I like to do is I'll kind of assume something that is correct or not correct. And I'll kind of build off that and say, well, what would that look like? Or what are some clues that would be left were that the case? And so let's say I assume something is correct, and I go, okay, well, based upon that, what are some clues? And I look and I look and I look and I can't find those clues. Then that's kind of an interesting indication. It's not a perfect solution because this is a little bit like a thought experiment. And you could do the same thing with assume something is wrong. What would that look like? And I would give, there's tons of different ways in which you can use this. And it can be, it's a little bit more vague, but at the same time, I feel like it can be used for kind of bigger, more amorphous questions, because you're kind of looking for holistic conclusions and holistic kind of effects from other things. You ever do this, Fletch?
Maybe. I'm not maybe exactly sure that we're thinking about the same thing as far as what we're describing, but it seems similar enough to mention here. One of the things that it was like a way that you can like read minds, right? And even being able to read your own mind is strangely helpful a lot of times.
Yeah.
So if you witness behavior, right,
Mm-hmm.
in yourself or in others, you can say, well, I can start to know what they believe right now. If they're running, for instance, and they look like they're in athletic gear and they're jogging really slowly, but they, you see them out there all the time. You can start to build an understanding of, oh, well, this person believes this is, probably good for them. You can start to say, this person believes that there's certain gear that you need to wear when you jog. You can begin to build your understanding of reading their mind, and that I see them there all the time. This is somebody that probably has a routine that they follow. This is probably a more orderly type of person. And so you can do that with yourself. Like, so if you've just gone and done something that's like that I really wish I wouldn't have done that. You can say, well, what did I have to believe at the moment? This goes back to like making decisions. Like, we kind of always make the decision we think is right. We can know that there's something we believe in our mind that was activated and triggered and everything else that we acted upon that made us do that thing. And we need to kind of hunt and find whatever it was that led us to that action. That, say we we're doing really good about eating healthy, and then one day we go to Marie Callender's and eat an entire pie, right? It's like, well, there's something in your mind that said that this is the right thing to do right now. Like, what was it? Like we can kind of start to kind of go back in ourselves and say, well, there's something that made me continue to do that. Right. And continue to eat that way, or to not exercise, or not take care of our health, or to be blind to managing the bottom line in your business, or like whatever it might be. It's like, oh yeah, I was really like, oh, I'm just going to keep working harder and this number's going to change. It's like, if that's an idea in your mind that made you continue to not pay attention to the bottom line in your business and needing to be profitable, then it's going to be helpful to you to know that that's there and get rid of it if it's wrong. And in that case, it's not helpful at all, certainly.
Wait, I think you lost me a little bit. Is this related to the assuming idea is true/false, or is there some other thing on here?
So
move into something that I haven't written down, which is totally fine.
Well, I was kind of reading down further on the list, and this seemed to most closely fit here.
Okay.
But so assuming an idea is true or false is like, okay, I'm ready to engage in this new business, right? And nothing's going to stop me. Okay. So we're like, if we're going to assume that's true, and we notice that there's some behavior that is going to derail that by looking at our behavior in the past, and if we have not addressed that, that can be problematic.
Yes.
So this is something that I would add to when you were assuming like inevitable success is like, yeah, as long as you're seeking understanding. It doesn't mean that you're not going to screw up, but when you screw up, what you need to do is to look for what really kind of created the conditions that led to that behavior. This is getting a little abstract, and
I think you're right, but I don't think I've made it clear what I'm trying to say here. I don't think so. Okay. Let me give an example, and I think that'll be helpful. So let's say what I'm saying here is you do both true and false. So let's assume that it's true that Zeus is the king of the gods, and let's work from there, and then let's assume that that's false, that Zeus is the king of the gods, and work from there. So what are some clues that would be left if Zeus is actually the king of the gods or something? Let's say that we could actually go onto, was it Mount Sinai, and see him. That would be a clue. If we could go there and see a giant guy with a beard holding a lightning bolt, that would be a clue. I'm giving a kind of a silly example here, but also, what would be false? A false thing would maybe be going to the mountain and seeing nothing, or some other situations or some logical inconsistencies with Zeus. Or a whole bunch of other things. So my point here was using kind of this as a tool to, you're not sure, there's something you're trying to figure out as true or false. Kind of play in your mind with assuming it's true. Now, what are some kind of ways that you could test that, but also just like, what are some clues that would be left, and what would that look like if it's true and if it's false? And then kind of compare that to reality or your perception of reality and see which one fits better. And maybe that can point you to which one's true and which one's false.
Well, there's kind of a principle. It's not really a principle. It's just a thing our mind does really well that is very important. And this can point to that. Like, assuming idea is both true, and like you have to do both, because if you just assume it's true, your mind is going to go out and look for evidence that it's true. And that can make you begin to believe whatever your assumption is. So if you don't test the opposite of that assumption and let your mind go try to find evidence the same manner, like once you begin to really assuming something is true, turns it into a goal. And your mind is a goal achieving mechanism. That's one way to represent it. It's very foundational. So if we aren't careful about the things we assume, we're only going to be noticing the things that make it feel like we're correct. And that can wind up taking us in very wrong directions.
This is where, like, in America, the massive political split, and the people who just believe completely different things because they have a goal to believe that their side is right, and anything that confirms that they believe and they push, and anything that detracts from that they dismiss. This is a really good point. It's separate what I was trying to make, but it's kind of the same idea.
I screwed up twice then.
No, you didn't. You got, no, it was actually, I think it's directly related. So it's not really, but I think you understood me this time and what I was playing. And I wasn't clear at first, but that's a really good point. Like, cause if we really want to be able to understand what's true, let's take the ego out of it. And maybe there's some things that you thought were true that are not true and vice versa. And let's try to look at both the angles. And this is going to be helpful in figuring out what's true and what's not true, because it's going to allow you to be open to seeing the evidence in both ways as best you can. And you're still human. You're probably still going to have a bias to some degree in some ways. And so, it's not perfect, but it will help.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. Don't have a ton of time left, so let's move forward. I did mention this as well, testability. This is sort of like a scientific thing. But from we've talked about wastefulness. You only have so many brain cycles. You only have so much time you can spend your attention on. Something that is not testable, it's not that you can't check it. And there's definitely times where you can something we think is not testable, we can make testable. We figure out how to make it testable. But it's harder to kind of make conclusions about things that you can't interact with. So like, I've got a theory that this star system that's a gazillion light years away has alien life on it, and prove me wrong, right? How are you going to prove me wrong? Well, you kind of can't. It's not really a testable theory. So is it true? Maybe. It's not really, it's kind of not the point with something like this. Now this does not mean that there can't be, but again, it's not something that I'm going to spend a lot of time and energy working on.
Yeah, it comes back to something else that we've discussed on this podcast is strategy. Like, you've only got so many resources at any given time. What are you going to spend those on? Spend them on things that are actually going to be able to take you someplace that are going to lead to building understanding. Okay, well, this is kind of an overall general direction that we want to be heading in our life.
Yeah. Okay, so the next one, could be go under building understanding. We talked about brains before, but I think I would encourage everybody to spend some time studying their own brain, be it reading books about the science of brains, or just trying to think about your own brain. It's very meta, but this, as Fletch mentioned before, everything kind of goes through the brain. The brain is part of all of this. And so building your understanding for it is going to allow you to see where it tries to point you wrong in terms of what's true and what's not true.
Yeah, this is something that I've spent a lot of my adult life, I guess, in the field of kind of some social, getting into kind of hard sciences with psychology and social psych and neurology, and then even kind of some of the more energetic physics and philosophical tie-ins with who we really are as a being and how we engage with this holographic representation of reality and like those kinds of things. It's interesting to me, but what it also has helped me do is to continue to not let my representation of reality really come back together after it was kind of cracked and broken. It's like, yeah, it's there. I don't really bump into a lot of things or fall down or fall off cliffs or catch myself on fire. Haven't done any of those things in weeks. So,
slacker.
But yeah, right. I need to get after it again. But because it hasn't come all the way back together for me to say, oh, I'm totally perceiving exactly what is in reality right now. It leaves a lot of gaps open for me to go into these places in my mind and work on these things that in all likelihood, my mind just kind of assembled out of a hodgepodge of things I've experienced or things I heard or things other people had done. It just creates some space for you to realize that there is a blind spot in your vision that you are not seeing unless your eyes move. Right? And that's why your eyes are moving.
Metaphorically.
Yeah, no, it's not even metaphorically. It's physically. Like, there's this thing called a saccade, I think is how it's pronounced, SICCADE. So your eyes are constantly moving a little bit. And what that does is, because the optical nerve comes back right in the back of your retina. And so where there's an optical, that nerve is, there's not like an optical receptor cell. So it can't see anything there. So your eye moves a little bit all the time. that kind of moves the light that's coming in. So when they do like eye surgery, they put these little drops in your eye, and it keeps your eye from moving, so they can work on it. And you actually go blind. You actually, like, your field of vision is completely gone, even though you're still picking up just as much light. Your brain ceases to be able to construct your vision.
Oh, interesting.
And so there's a lot of stuff like that with taste, with hearing, with all these different senses.
And
so
building your understanding on that is going to help you differentiate what's true and what's not true, for sure.
Well, what it does is it really like takes a hammer and whacks, like, wait, there's a whole lot that I built here that isn't really the way it seems. Right.
Yeah.
It doesn't keep you from running into things, but
let's put a pin in that. And I think we should kind of expand on that in the next one.
Yeah. Move on.
I think that another thing that's important is being okay with the unknown or ambiguity. If you have a goal to not have ambiguity, or to feel like you know everything and everything is completely clear and set out for you, that goal is going to work against your ability to know what's true, because you're going to try to fill in the gaps and make conclusions that you shouldn't make in terms of what, what's really happening and what's really true. But that doesn't mean that you can't acknowledge the ambiguity and learn something and still kind of build around that. So I would encourage you to not be afraid of admitting you don't know something and saying, hey, I don't think I can know this right now. And that's fine to some degree. It doesn't mean it can't ever be known, or there's some ambiguity here that and that's fine. So this is an important thing to me, because feeling like you know everything is I promise you're wrong.
Well, what it also does, it's so much better to be okay with not knowing than to pretend that you know. And that's what you're doing if you don't know. So pretending I know I can swim across the ocean. Well, give it a shot. If you're going to test it, you're going to wind up, probably not succeeding.
It's a really good way to stay ignorant if you can't admit you don't know something.
Yeah, it closes you off. It's like, well, I know everything I need to know. Maybe you do, but it doesn't let you notice new things that might be better for you.
Yeah. We've mentioned this quite a bit of times, and this is very important, but I think let's identify what you want to believe. So if you're a specific religion and you've been raised that religion, you're going to probably want to believe that religion is correct. Well, maybe a priest did something bad to you, so now you don't want to believe.
I was going to say, it can go both ways. Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And so acknowledging that is going to help you see some of these filters that your brain is going for. It's going to help you with kind of the true false dichotomies and really going, okay, I do want to believe that this guy is a great guy and this guy is a bad guy. And what does that mean to me? And when I'm testing things related to that, let's be aware of that, so we can try to pull that out of as much as we can. We're not going to be able to pull it out completely, probably, but pull it out of the equation and really try to to identify what's true and what's not true.
Well, this is like culturally, it's such a big, like, you come into a new situation. Who's the good guy? Who's the bad guy?
Like
we're always trying to figure, like, you watch a movie. Okay. Who's the good guy? Who's the bad guy?
Men in Black.
Like politics. Okay. They're the good guys. They're the bad guys. Wars. We're the good guys. They're the bad guys.
Mm-hmm. It's what you want to believe.
There's this cultural and maybe even more than that, but at least cultural, like, thing that makes us want to believe that there are good guys and bad guys. And that us is usually good guys.
Mm-hmm. Always. Well, okay, maybe usually is better.
Yeah, well, I'm just saying. Well, it may be always, because if you're
really drinking the Kool-Aid,
it depends on how you're identifying yourself.
Yeah.
And this opens up identity, which is a whole other concept. It's extremely important. But identifying yourself as representing a group is fraught with problems. Like, it breaks down all over the place. Anyway, so identify what you want to believe. So just realize that there's this cultural pressure with however you're identifying yourself at any given time that's going to make you want to believe the things that the group believes, and that you've been taught are dichotomies and maybe false dichotomies
Mhm.
that exist in the world.
This is very useful.
Yeah.
This is probably one of the most things you're going to come into contact with, like on a just daily basis, when you're trying to identify what's true. Because your first thing your brain is going to want to do is going to want to try to get you to confirm what you already believe. And by identifying that, you take a significant amount of that power away from that kind of part of your brain, and which is what you want to do most of the time, I think. There's this really neat book called The Da Vinci Principles. I can't remember how many. I think there's like 9. And the first principle that he says kind of like almost assures the rest of the principles is curiosity. So don't ever lose your childlike curiosity, because this is going to be, it's not going to be as direct of a way of immediately telling what's true and what's not true, but it's going to really enable you to long-term be able to identify different things. It's going to enable you to change your mind on things when new evidence comes into play, because you're just curious. You just, just try to think of it like just trying to figure out what's going on. And just honest curiosity goes a really long way, I think, to eliminating, kind of identifying what you want to believe and reducing its effect on you. If you're genuinely curious on what's true and what's not true, even if it's something that shows that what you believed for years is false, but you're genuinely curious, it's going to really help you get there. And I really love, I'm so happy that this was the first thing in here. I do consider myself a very curious person, but sometimes I lose sight of it, and I have to kind of take myself back to like when I was really young, and it was just like curiosity all the time. And it's such a beautiful, peaceful.
Is a beautiful experience. I feel that I'm quite curious, but then I also am like, how do I know that? Am I comparing myself to other people, and I see how I engage with new stuff, and it seems like I'm engaging with new stuff more than other people? Well, yeah. So I guess I'm comparing myself to a norm in a lot of ways, which is not a good plan. Like that doesn't, that's always not really helpful. But the concept of curiosity by itself, to say, oh, I'm really curious, or I'm not very curious, I'm not really sure if we know that's true or not. Like it's kind of something that we're comparing to other people, and so the scale might be really skewed.
Mm-hmm.
But just know that feeling of curiosity, of uncovering or understanding or finding something unknown and novel, is something that we want to cultivate for ourselves. And
Absolutely.
So regardless of where you are, continue to feed that and continue to grow that, whether you see yourself compared to somebody else as more or less. I don't think that's really even something you can know. And it's really a norm that probably gets,
it's not really
pulled
important
in there quite a bit. Yeah.
You can compare yourself to where you were before and
yeah,
say,
that's a good, it's something I think Jordan Peterson said, don't compare yourself with others, compare yourself with who you were yesterday. It's a better plan.
It just, there's so many positive benefits beyond just how to know what's true. I think it's just a more pleasant life in general when you can keep your curiosity for your whole life, essentially. Okay, so just about out of time. I'm going to try to go through these things really quickly. We can always cover them in the next one. For me personally, no idea is sacred. And I know this, some people, there's ideas that they just don't want to touch. And to me, I think identifying just like, hey, anything is on the table if it can, anything can be questioned. And I think this is important, again, to being genuinely curious about what's true and what's not true. If you can't, if you have a system of ideas that can't be looked at and can't be scrutinized, then it doesn't sound like a very good system, to be honest.
Yeah. I read that and I was like, I haven't really done a good job of building my own understanding of the word sacred. Does that mean it can't be challenged? Like okay, maybe that's a reasonable
sort of
representation. Okay.
It can't be refuted or challenged. It's kind of slightly different.
So here's the weird thing. So can't be like,
or shouldn't be
like you're going to have, there's going to be repercussions and who are the repercussions? Are they enacted by the body of a church or by a government, or is this thing so close to a natural law that you're going to just waste time on going against it? Like, so anyway, I don't really know what the word sacred means. And I don't really know but so I can kind of start to see that you need to be able to engage with things. You shouldn't
Yes.
necessarily protect them and get mad at somebody else if they ask you a question about it. That doesn't seem to serve any purpose at all. But
Which is,
yeah, go ahead.
yeah, I think this goes back to, I thought of something, an idea that as much as like the founding fathers, did some things wrong, like slavery and stuff like that, the idea of freedom of speech really ties well into this. And I think that was such a great idea, because there's no idea that you should be able to share that would make you, like in China, you could say, you criticize them, or a lot of governments, not just China, a lot of governments, you criticize the government publicly, and that is taboo, and to the degree where they could put you in prison. I think that is contrary to being able to figure out what's true and what's not true, and it doesn't help those organizations long term. It might seem like it in the short term, but yeah, I'm very much no idea is sacred, and I think this helps keep my curiosity up. Okay, here's
the more rigid anything is, the greater its chances to completely crumble,
brittle.
and it becomes brittle, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so treating ideas in your mind that way, you're just waiting for something to come along and completely destroy everything all in one fell swoop, right?
So faith is not a good tool for understanding what's true and what's not true. So I want you to really think about exactly what I said. If you believe in faith, I'm not saying that faith isn't useful, but I'm saying that faith is not a good tool for understanding what's true and what's not true. In fact, I think it's one of the worst tools, and it often gets people to believe incredibly wild things based upon no evidence, and even evidence to the contrary. And so this is something that, you're not going to want to, I think that if you're using faith to justify something that you believe, that I think that process is heavily flawed.
Yeah, I don't see anything wrong with what you said.
Okay.
It's
ringing endorsement.
I tend to say these things like, yeah, if I were the other person, I would kind of probably be offended by what I just said.
Oh, no, it's all right.
So, but yeah, it's just that is not a tool to know what's true.
Yeah.
Like, just period. Yeah.
Everything in here was basically part of kind of the BS detection kit, so I'm just going to leave that out. We'll make this one last point. You talked about don't do source thinking. Can you elaborate on that? Because you're the one that wanted to add this, and I think it's a great idea.
What was I talking about or thinking about?
I think you were saying, like, basically this is like authority. Don't just like take what an authority says. And
so that's not thinking. Going to a source like the government is my source for morality. That's not thinking. Like a church body is my source of morality or of knowing what's true, or the Bible being a doctrine that has only truth in it and only important things in it. Having a source outside of yourself, like, you have to be responsible for what you believe. At the end of the day, you have to be the one that's responsible. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying your mind. I'm saying you as the being that is engaging with, the physical world in whatever way we do. You are the only person that can be the only being that can bear that responsibility.
Absolutely. Totally agree with that.
Everything breaks down the more you completely rely on any source outside of that to tell you what's true and good and important.
Yeah, it's easy though. That's the problem with this. It's really easy to just let somebody do the thinking for you.
It's simple. It's simple. Yeah.
And so I think this definitely happens a lot. And I would just say beware of it. And there's some of this that is natural to our existence, especially as you're a child. You kind of have to have some amount of authority. When your parent tells you not to run into the street, that's good that certain of authority. But I think that as an adult, you have to take responsibility for what you believe, and you have to pour over all the truth and false in your brain yourself, or else you're maybe not really an adult, at least not in this way, philosophically.
I think most people are not. And I'm not saying that in a condescending way. And I probably include myself in that. I'm in adolescence. Frankly, I'm not joking at all.
Yeah.
But there was no.
I called your wife, and she definitely said that you're not an adult.
Oh yeah. Well, I still do the pull my finger thing with my kids. So yeah,
she says it with a smile though. Yeah.
Yeah. No, but when you think about it, the there was not some point in time where you magically began thinking about everything with a completely different method. One of the methods that we described here, that was not something you ever did. We were not taught that by and large. We didn't go through some rite of passage. We didn't finally get to a place where we built this ourselves, most of us. And so if that never happened, then you're just a kind of a child with a lot of accumulated memories that are all fraught with problems and misrepresentations. So it's like, that is why we have to have a different method, that we're not looking through a frame of representation or a lens back on our memory to try to decide what's true or good and important. We have to have a different method because we've accumulated a whole bunch of stuff that might not be true. And we don't know even which is which. Some of it might be true. Some of it might not be true. Some of it we can't really know. We've got to have a different method. And I would tend to lean toward kind of declaring, not as like it's set in stone, I'll punch you if you attack it, but you don't become an adult. You don't become something other than a kid until you began using your mind this way, because there's nothing that really differentiates it. It's not like, oh, I can have children, I'm sexually mature. Like, there's nothing in our mind that completely changes past the age of like 4 or 5, right? When it just becomes a little less plastic.
There's definitely people who are well over 50 who are still living like children.
Yeah, well, you think about like Bezos, right? So he made a commitment to his wife. I assume that fidelity was part of it. And he's made $100 billion. So you think he's got everything figured out. And then he breaks a commitment. Like he breaks what it seems like, because she got half of what he had, that he did something that was flagrant enough of a bad decision for the court to award her, half of the money he had. Like,
I don't think she got half, but she get a lot.
You know what I mean? I'm not saying
she get billions of dollars,
lots of money, right?
Lots of money.
And so this is a person that we
must have been worth it, Jeff.
Yeah. So I was going to say that's pretty high price, yeah. But this is a person who would write a book and we would read it, and that would be about success.
Mm-hmm.
When there are certain things in his life that he didn't really get right, whether it was marrying the wrong woman to begin with, or promising her things that he couldn't deliver, or whatever, right? I don't know. I don't know the guy at all. But what I'm saying is that there are tons of people like this, and we don't know. And we're like this, mm-hmm. Right? I don't necessarily know that he would meet the criteria across the board of being an adult with the kind of definition that I gave, right? That might seem strange.
Sure.
No, and I'm not totally. I wouldn't argue. I would argue it to find out whether or not that we can say that we're really ever an adult. I think we want to try to achieve that in life. I think it would be better for us if we try to apply this to more areas in our life. I don't see how that would ever
not too many
not
though.
Be true.
Sometimes you want to channel the kid in you, but philosophically, at least, let's move on, because I think we could go on and on about that. So, because I do need to go, but just to recap, there's going to be at least 2 more of these, and potentially a third more, fourth more, whatever. And so this was how to know what's true. Hopefully this was helpful. If you are watching this on YouTube, please feel free to leave a comment. If you've got this on podcast, you can reach out to us if you have any questions or thoughts on this. We'd be happy to hear from you. And thanks for listening. Have a great day.
Mash that like button and subscribe.
There you go. That's what Fletch said.
Come on, man. Call to action. You're a marketer. Let's go, David. All right, guys.
Have a good one.
Take care.